Welcome everyone to our late July tour. What we're looking at right here is our original raised bed that we built during the shutdowns of the pandemic of 2020. A lot of the supplies were limited, so we ended up using plywood instead of boards, and we really didn't expect it to hold up very well, but it did. So that's where everything started, was this small little garden for food last year, and then this January of 2021 we expanded. Over to the left we have this little bulb right there. See that? Yeah, that is a flowering onion, so we can save the seeds. Here we have my little rain gauge. Oh my goodness, isn't he cute? And some chives I stuck in behind the calendula flowers that are there that I use for a lot of healing properties and teas. This is Chevelle's garden, and the large leaves are a volunteer squash pumpkin thing that ended up being really cute. She also planted some red salvia that I started from seeds that I collected from my stuff out front last year, and a bunch of marigolds that I also started from the seed. Right here we have a cinnamon basil, which smells so beautiful, and this is a quick connect where we put our drip irrigation in. I highly recommend those fasteners. As you can see here, there's a couple other things like nasturtiums there to the right, which are edible and a little bit spicy, and that tall fluffy thing is Celosia, I think you pronounce it, that we picked up at Frank's Flowers, which was completely an impulse buy, but it added some decorative look to it until the pumpkin took over. But we've got lots of flowers, and we'll see what these end up being. They did turn out to be white with green stripes, which was really cute. So here what we have is an empty bed because the garlic and onions were planted here. We tried to do carrots. The carrots didn't germinate very well, so you can see that I only got a couple there. But here we have the experiment for overwintering seeds in milk jugs. Didn't turn out very good. Maybe I'll try again next year. We have a Genovese Basil, which I'm using as a companion plant, which deters pests. And this dust here on my pepper plant is diatomaceous earth, also to deter pests. The Pinot Noir turns a beautiful purple color, and they are incredibly delicious. Here we have a winter savory, which I just planted not too long ago. And this is a radish that I'm letting go to seed so that I can collect those for next year. Those I'm just gonna let dry for a couple days and then stick them in a paper bag. This pepper plant here is what they call a keystone resistant. It wasn't a very prolific pepper producing plant. I've had green peppers that did better. They weren't incredibly large, and in fact they got destroyed by insects quite a bit. I mean, that's not something you'd write home to mom about. Look at that little thing. But they were okay. I definitely want to try something different next year. The plant ended up really big, and for as big of a plant that it was, the peppers just didn't produce the way I thought they should. Moving over here, we have another bell pepper. This one here was called a Gypsy Bell, and it's supposed to turn red, but I can't say that I ever saw it turn red so far. I left a few of them on for a really long time, and bugs got to them, so they just never really turned red. I have a couple that I'm leaving, but they are incredibly delicious. Next to that, I have 3 sweet banana peppers, and they did pretty well. Eventually, the sunflowers behind them got a little too shady, so I had to do some pruning. And this here, I thought was a volunteer carrot, because that's where my carrot was last year. But it turned out to be Queen Anne's lace after I did some careful critiquing. But this is a Boston pickle cucumber, and I got so many pickles out of this. Eventually I had to pull it though because it got damaged by cucumber beetles. They were really bad this year. So yeah, this is what my plans for last year were. I'm gonna obviously come in the fall and plant this with lots more garlic and maybe just a little bit of onions for now, but I think I mostly want to do garlic here, and that way I can use that drip irrigation to keep things wet whenever it starts to warm up again. Now we say goodbye to the old 2020 bed and move on with our tour. We're gonna move over here. This is a new bed that we used a fire ring. There are zinnia in the back, and here on the sides we have pink calendula. Those were new. I got those, I think, from Baker Creek. Tucked in there, there's horehound. You can't see very good, but it is definitely there. That is feverfew. And right here is a pink dandelion. Still has not bloomed, but I think it was because we put it in kind of late. We have this lovely hanging basket that did not last very much longer. And I made that little light, which did not go well. It was kind of junk and it isn't working now. Here is the sunflower patch, and it is much bigger in later months. You'll see we have the nasturtium down front, and this is just a pot of yellow onions, and on the fence there we have cucamelons, which is a small watermelon looking cucumber, which is really fun. Let's just talk about hanging baskets. Even though I ran drip irrigation to them, the gravity was not kind and they did not get watered the way they should have. So I definitely would love some expertise when it comes to hanging baskets. I don't even care if it's not organic at this point. I just want to make sure that it stays alive. These are not doing well and just continue to get more and more disgusting. Okay, so we're at this seeding area. This is not the ideal seeding area. I've picked out a lot of other things and many of them were unavailable or on back order. So this will have to suffice. This collection here are all of the plants that I ended up giving away to the neighbors on the front porch for free because I like making other people happy. This was my living wall. I attached the morning glory vines with twine and allowed them to grow up onto a piece of fence that I attached to the poles. It did not end up filling in evenly, but I have a plan to change that too. My potting bench is looking adorable. I love this thing. It was almost free, aside from the fact that the cedar planks do not stay nice. This is my gutter turned into a planter, gutter potter. This is a wild chamomile I found in the driveway, so I transplanted it, and also I'm growing some Indian tobacco or aloe bella beside it. Going into the garden, we're going to start over here next to the fairy garden and the pond area. We have lemongrass, some salvias, some poppies, some bergamot, some decorative things. This tiny pond ended up being more work than it was worth, but I'm going to rethink that next year too. My space for the fairies is there because it's cute and adorable. I ended up having to put in the bigger potted plants beside it to help shade them because they took way too much sun. I definitely need a more powerful pump and a different solar panel, so those are things I'm going to consider. Coming over here, we have a morning glory that's vining up the trellis, and beside that we have some holy basil or tulsi, which is great for tea. And in front we have a backup feverfew because you can never have too much of that during a pandemic. And let's see, where else are we going to go here? We're going to go over here to the other side. Great. In this pot we have real peppermint. And beside that is a Japanese hops, which I thought would grow hops to make beer, but that's a lie. It's just a weed. Here is my irrigation setup that gives me options to expand. There's 4 hookups there, which I will eventually need to get everything else run. I'm coming over here, and we look at the other side. We have morning glories that are running up the other side of the trellis. Same kind, they're kind of a red. Beside it, we have Valerian Root and heliotrope. Those are used mostly for religious things and a few medicinal properties. Here we have nasturtiums again. This is still working with the same concept of companion planting, and they are growing at the foot of these giant loofah plants. There are 3 seeds that are creating this. Moving over here, we have yarrow growing that I transplanted from a wild plant that I found in the woods. Here we have a bunch of echinacea, which is great for an immunity boost. We have borage, which is awesome for pollination and has some skincare properties. Although I haven't really worked with that plant for that reason yet. I plan on it. Here is my lovely mugwort, which has so many properties, but mostly good for tea to treat menstrual problems. And I'm gonna let it go to seed so I can share those seeds with others. Coming over here, we have my white sage plant next to the comfrey. 2 very healing plants next to each other. It's taken a little bit of damage from some bugs, but it's still doing pretty well. And another look at the cucamelon that has taken over its little trellis that is shaped like a cone. You can barely only see the top. I highly recommend making pickles out of these. Other people say no. I say do it. They are so delicious. This is what's left of my potato patch. I have dug out 1/3 of the potatoes at this point, and the other 2/3 are still in there. This is my zucchini plant that has not done well since day 1. Spoiler alert, it did end up having enough life force in it to produce 1 zucchini, but these okra, on the other hand, ended up growing as tall as trees. So they look like normal plants here, but you'll see in future tours, oh my goodness. These 4 pots are peppers that I started from seed. We have a Cali green bell pepper, a sweet banana, a hot banana, and an Italian red. And that's just a guess because it was a pepper that was given to me, that was given to my parents by some of their friends, and my parents liked it, so I tried to save the seeds, and it successfully happened, although I lost a lot of the seedlings. So this is kind of an experiment to see how valuable and capable saved seeds were, and I got several decent peppers out of these plants. I have some more nasturtium and basil just here trying to help with pollination and bad bug deterrence. The basil sadly ended up getting blighted quite bad, and I had to pull it eventually. But my cilantro died really early. It wasn't doing so good to begin with, but that's okay. Over here we have my watermelon patch, which turned out to be 2 watermelons, and that's it. But still, I successfully grew watermelons, and that was exciting. Behind all of that is ornamental broom corn that I'm going to use to make brooms out of. This doesn't actually produce ears of corn, but it produces the tassels This here that we're looking at is what's called a lemon cucumber. And instead of being an elongated cucumber that is green, it is a round, lemony shaped yellow type cucumber, which has exactly the same flavor in my opinion as a regular cucumber, and also made excellent pickles. It also is less susceptible, oh, there's a picture of it. It's also very less susceptible to the cucumber beetle damage, although eventually it did get really sick and I had to pull it. But it was the last large cucumber that I pulled. This is my bean patch. I have several green bean bags in my freezer now. I realized that the teepee that I made was not quite strong enough for that many plants, so next year I'll have to do something a little more reinforced. These got really sick with disease and blight or some kind of fungal something, and at this point they're all kind of dying, and I'm just waiting to harvest the dried beans from there so that I can keep those for overwintering. In the back I have a succotash bean, which is the type of beans that were eaten allegedly at the first Thanksgiving. So just trying to keep in touch with my native roots, and I thought I would grow that and try to serve that to my family for Thanksgiving this year. Coming over here, we have, this is a dwarf tricolor morning glory in the pot. It did not vine. It's apparently a bushy one, so it turned out to be really pretty. And then we have cabbages over here. They are delicious, and I'm very happy that I grew them. I have a celery that I grew from the tops of celery from last year's Thanksgiving. A lot of these greens are covered in diatomaceous earth, just like some of the others, because there was a bunch of bugs eating holes through things, and I don't want holes in my leaves that I'm trying to eat. Red romaine, a butter crunch, and a butter gem lettuce there. What I just pointed to over there was a blue morning glory, and here we have our neglect tomato. All kinds of things have happened to this, and it's still growing, although it's toward the end of its life now, but it did produce some really good tomatoes, which goes to show that with only a small amount of love, you too could have tomatoes. Although if you give them lots of love, they do much better. Okay, so now we've moved on to the pepper pots. This one here is a cayenne pepper. Over there is a habanero pepper. In between that, we have some arnica that really is not doing well. I have to try that one again. It didn't take. I was really hoping to get some of that because I wanted to make salve out of it, but hey, we can't be perfect 100% of the time. These flowers are beautiful. I love them. I think I'll plant more of them, but less of them in one space. I planted them a little too dense, and they ended up being just too thick for their own good. I added some elecampane over here, which is another useful medicinal herb. I've got my black pansies in front, and over there is a Hungarian poppy, and behind that is a black-eyed Susan that I got also from the woods. Over here we have a Tajin jalapeno, and beside it is jasmine tobacco. Underneath that we have several different types of violas and pansies. That is a purple sage bush. Beside this is the poblano pepper. Continuing on, we have a tricolor sage with some more different violas and Johnny Jump Up pansies. The last pepper plant we have here is serrano, and it was very prolific. I was really excited about that. My little baby dill there, so that whenever I continue making pickles, I have some dill for that. This is a thornless berry bush. And this is a black swan poppy. Behind that is a status, which is commonly used in a lot of floral arrangements. We have some zinnias here on the end of one of our raised beds, and behind that is ground cherries palooza. They have taken over. If you ever decide to grow ground cherries, which is a great idea, do not grow them where they can take over the space. It's definitely too much. One plant is enough. Highly recommend one plant, not three, which is what I try to do here. This tomato here is my Paul Robinson. I love it, but I think it just needed to have less chaos around it. This is a little close-up of what a ground cherry is. It's essentially kind of like a tomatillo, except for this one is a pineapple variety, so it has like a real sweetness to it. It tastes like a really sweet and sour tomato with the same texture as a tomato. We're planning on making jelly out of that, but I just had never grown one before and had no experience, and I definitely overdid it. So noted for next year for sure, because you can see it's crowding out my tomatoes. Along the rest of this edge, we have all of my hot Hungarian banana peppers, and 3 plants was definitely the right amount, I think, on that one. I got a decent yield, probably more than I needed, but I was able to give away a lot, so I definitely will do the same thing next year. And I also like the location that they were in. We have a regular jalapeno pepper here to the left. Beside that is a Roma that I bought at the store, and it just really never did very well. And my pear tomato also is struggling a little bit, but these potted tomatoes just don't do as well as the ones in the raised bed. My slicer cucumber, as you can see, has come over the edge. I trimmed it back quite a bit. It's also struggling with cucumber beetles, so I need to work on that. But this pots at the end of the raised bed, just they never really got enough water, so I definitely need to think about a different setup for distribution on that. This is my makeshift trellis that is so not aesthetically pleasing, but it worked for the time being. I got about 8 more cucumbers out of this mess that spilled over, so I was pretty happy about that. This is my Chadwick Cherry, and it is quite the tree. It produced a lot of tomatoes. It was also one that was the easiest to keep alive in the seedling stage, so I highly recommend that variety. They were gorgeous, they were yummy, they were way bigger than a cherry. They're more like a salad-sized tomato. I don't know if that was something that I did to make them bigger. Some of them were small, but I also feel like this year it took a long time for green tomatoes to turn red. So I feel like the first set were really big because they stayed on the vine like way too long. So beside that, I'm pretty sure this is the Black Noir, and I absolutely enjoyed these tomatoes. They were delicious. They do not turn black. They're very tie-dye-ish inside. And this measly little plant right there at the end is the hybrid Better Boy, and I was completely unimpressed by that. The fruit on it is a little more uniform, a little less cat-faced, but it did not produce nearly as much as the rest of the heirlooms. So that was my comparison of hybrid to heirloom production. So I probably won't grow that one again. This is another look at the Paul Robinson. I bought that one. I'm going to try to save seeds for that one. And a little calendula down there for some companion planting, which I think definitely helped with pollination. And another ground cherry, which I won't ever do again. As you can see that they're just, see that's a picture of a cucumber beetle. They're just everywhere, and no matter what you do, they're there. So I highly recommend spraying them with some organic pesticides. And yes, this here I'm showing you the butterfly pea vine, which did really well at first and then eventually got eaten by some kind of animal, and so that put the kaputs to that. That I just showed you is Landis lettuce, and this here is miner's lettuce, which is a perennial wild lettuce that you can eat. So I put that in there in hopes it'll come back next year. Landis lettuce is frost hardy, so I had that in early. The cilantro there did well for a little bit, and eventually the shade from the loofahs took over and it was no longer viable. The loofahs also are competing with the tomato beside them, and so they kind of squashed that one out a little bit. I didn't think that the loofahs would do well, but there's so many of them now. There's probably 30 or 40 on the trellis. It's weighting it down to the point where I'm not sure it's going to last much longer. This was my 5th attempt at the gray poppies. Definitely didn't happen. This was another one of the Ganzianias, or however you say it, from earlier. It got eaten by something. I'm not having luck with moles or voles. This is we're calling it the Heather Volunteer Tomato. This grows out of the cracks of my best friend's house. So I obviously had to have one of my own, and it actually turned out to be a really fun tomato. It's a little bit bigger than a salad tomato, but not quite a slicer. Beside that, we have the Bumble Bee Tomato. It's called Purple Bumblebee. It does not turn purple. It gets red with green streaks. This here is called the Blueberry Tomato, and it does not turn blue. It turns purple with a blush of yellow. And so when it's mostly purple with the bottom turning yellow, that's when it's time to pick it. I highly recommend this as a cherry tomato. I used it in pasta salads and all things this summer, and everyone that had one loved it. They have a really nice taste to them that isn't super tomatoey. Plus, they grow suckers out of the leaves in a really weird way, almost like a hand with fingers. So it's super easy to propagate. You could literally have an entire backyard of these tomatoes because they just keep producing new plants off of the parent plant. So definitely recommend this. It also was really resistant to blight and pests and stuff. So down here we have the Boston pickle cucumber, and I didn't quite get as many out of this batch as I did the other raised bed. This right here that I'm pointing to was a broken branch that I just stuck it in the ground to see if it would root, and it definitely did. This is a Roma here I grew from seed. We've already talked about the neglect tomato. We have a nasturtium here. Again, these flowers are edible. They're kind of spicy. I think I already mentioned that though. And this beautiful collection of tomatoes here are my favorite. They are the Brandywine. They do cat face a lot, but they are delicious. Overall, they taste just the best, and I highly recommend them as a reliable heirloom. Here we have Genovese Basil. This is cinnamon basil. Behind that is the Aunt Ruby's German tomato. And it is more of a green tomato with the inside being reddish. You have to really squish it to know when it's ready to be picked. But it's a very pretty tomato and a very delicious tomato. Not as impressed as some of the other ones, but I definitely enjoyed it. Beside that, we have the Berkeley tie-dye, which was always a struggle to keep alive, although the fruit that comes off of it is absolutely beautiful. They are not lying when they say it looks like a tie-dye. It definitely is. Here is another variety of basil called Opal Basil. And we're back to the loofahs, and you can see how the mess of the tomatoes and the loofahs are getting a little intertwined. Trust me, it gets worse. And now, boof, we're back at the back half of the garden, and here we have volunteer sunflower, which is the tallest part. We have some marigolds, and the pots are basically the plants that are in rehab trying to find their way to another spot. It gives them a time to acclimate from the greenhouse to the rest of the garden. more often than not, this is where plants come to die. But so far we have these ones still alive. So we have a Brunera right there that was given to me. I have some of them out front. It has a really beautiful blue flower and it's resistant to deer. This is a Sow Thistle. It is definitely a weed to most people, but it also has medicinal properties. That is a chamomile that does eventually perk up a little bit, but right now it's just a little rough because I dug it up and it just needs some love. Beside that, I think that's fleabane, which is also a really good medicinal weed. And in front of that, I'm pretty sure is the pennycress. So I just kind of, when I find plants that I know have value, I dig them up and stick them in pots until I find a permanent place. This is a Loganberry bush. First year, so it might not produce berries, but it's doing good so far. This is a Juniper Bush, which I will use eventually when it catches up with its growth in smoke cleansing wands and types of things. Here we have my bird bath, which does not have water in it because there was a bird disease going around and we were told not to do that. It looks gross because I put a piece of quartz that I found in there, which was probably from a local creek and definitely had a lot of rust in it. This is where the bird feeder was, and somehow the sunflower seeds from the bird feeder ended up here. So we have sunflowers now next to my rose, which was problematic because they created a little too much shade, as did these marigolds, which turned into a forest of marigolds, because that's just what they seem to do with me. I'm not really sure. If I remember correctly, I feel like this was 4 plants in about 2 feet of space. This pot here is a pot of wood sorrel, which was actually lemongrass at one point, and then somehow wood sorrel sowed itself in there, so now I have a pot of wood sorrel. My greenhouse is looking disheveled, but has a few fall crops planted in it, some onions and such, and yeah, we have some cleaning up to do, but we're doing our best here. The back gate has a nice little view. We have our little benches here because it's just a nice place to chill. Just give one last little look around. This is just such a nice place to be. I hope you enjoyed yourself today. If you have any questions about gardening, feel free to contact me and let's have a discussion. Happy gardening, everyone, and have a wonderful harvest.